Okay, more safety stuff. Antennas. It's not necessarily electrical. Well, I take it back. There is a little bit of a issue. Uh, Mostly it's where you put an antenna. You need to make sure that you're clear of any power lines. Never try to put an antenna up on a power pole. When you install an antenna, the rule is, fortunately, it's not a law because I'm in violation, that if it should fall down, that no part of it would be closer than 10 feet to a power line. Because if it falls on the power line, you've got, even residential, you've got a few thousand volts there on that distribution line. Not a good thing to come running through your coax into your radio. Probably means you got to buy a new radio, at least, and an antenna.
And coax.
And maybe coax.
And that gets expensive.
When you actually have your antenna up, that's fitting. Parts of that antenna can have several thousand volts on it. And you can get one of these. So antennas should be installed so that the average person can't accidentally touch part of it, especially not an end where the high voltage is going to be. So even when you run a wire antenna and maybe a inverted V type, the end should be like 8 or 10 feet above the ground. So you can't accidentally do it. Now, if somebody wants to jump up there and grab it, then that's, yeah. They should have known what they were doing.
Really.
Which of the following is an important safety precaution to observe when putting up an antenna tower?
No, I mean, it couldn't be. A's not in there.
Right.
Right. You Charlie.
Charlie. Just watch out for electrical wires. Because sometimes when you're putting one up, you aren't looking at everything. What's the minimum safe distance from a power line to allow when installing an antenna? Why should you avoid attaching an antenna to a power pole? Right. High voltage lines on the power pole.
Beyond safety, it will probably mess with the transmission.
Yeah, there's several reasons why. What hazard is created by touching an antenna during a transmission?
Bravo, Laura.
Yeah, you don't get radiation poisoning. And I doubt that you get electrocuted, but you sure as hell would regret doing it.
Probably wish we hadn't have done it.
Right.
It's a pretty unique feeling. It's like inside of your, it's like inside of your skin.
Yeah, it's more than a sunburn.
Yeah, it's
When you're putting up a tower, the first thing is if it's one that you have to climb, you need to make sure that you've had proper training and equipment. You need a approved climbing harness. You need a ground observer, at least one at all times if you're up on a tower or up on the roof putting up an antenna. Somebody that can call 911 when you fall. If it's a crank up antenna where there's sections and a sort of telescope and you can do it manually or have an electric winch. Before you climb one of those, I'm not sure why you would unless there's some problem. Because the whole purpose of the crank up is you can get the antenna on at a low height and then just crank it up into position. But if you're going to climb a crank up tower, you need to make sure that the interlocks. So when those sections go up, there's actually a little lock mechanism so that they can't come back down. You need to ensure that those are in place. And if the tower has guy wires, and it will unless it's a freestanding tower with a tons of concrete base, you'll normally have turnbuckles on it or some form of taking up the slack to tension the guy wires. You need to check those. If it's a regular turnbuckle, it should have safety wire in it so they don't turn. You get a lot of vibration from the wind that you may not realize, which can actually cause them to loosen up.
What were those rules when I was working for the TV company and they had us climbing 40-foot poles with spurs?
Well, you had a belt, right?
Yeah, but there wasn't nobody there watching.
Oh, well, now see that. There should have been.
Yeah, we had a guy fall on one, boy. I tell you what, those little things that stick out when you stick them spurs in, them things will hurt.
I bet. A couple examples of some towers. Both of those are crank ups. That's a nice one over here on the right, on the left. That's a typical climbing harness. They're actually, I've got one like that from Amazon. It's only 30, 40 bucks. Not that expensive. What is required when climbing an antenna tower? Although I don't climb any towers, I just use it on the roof. I can tether myself.
That's bad enough if you fall off.
God wanted me to climb towers, he would have given me my Santa physique.
Under what circumstances is it safe to climb a tower without a helper or observer?
Delta.
Never. You ever are needing to do that, the PCARS Club in Melbourne, once or twice a year, has a tower climbing class. Charlie?
Yep.
That sounds right to me. What's the purpose of a safety wire through a turnbuckle used to tension guy lines?
Bravo.
Bravo. Now that you got the tower up, it needs to be grounded. The rule is that you should have a ground rod at each leg. Most of these towers are triangular or have 3 legs. So you should have an 8-foot ground rod at each leg, tied to each leg of the tower and tied together. And then tied to your shack ground outside your shack. They should be short and direct as possible, no 90-degree bends. That creates enough inductance that it will cause, if there was a lightning strike, it actually cause the lightning to jump off to something else at that bend, or at least partially. And normally they recommend at least 6-gauge wire or strap to tie these things together. Bigger is better, but it costs more. So it's one of those trade-offs.
Yeah, that copper wire, I got some copper wire on mine. Not quite as big as my little finger, but it's pretty thick, solid. But that's coming down 30 foot to a ground wire.
Yeah, we have one guy in the Well, you're actually in the Kennedy Club and the Indian River Club, who's a little anal in this stuff and uses like 4-aught welding cable to connect things. That's a little extreme.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe he got it for free. Which of the following establishes grounding requirements for an amateur radio tower or antenna? Oh, and I didn't mention that, but you should be able to figure it out.
Delta?
No.
Well,
The general
Well-
rule is for the rules and regulations, the local usually takes precedent over the next higher and on up.
so it'd be Bravo,
Local can be more restrictive than
the national code.
county or national or international, so. But it can't be less. In other words, if the national code says you got to do this, the local code can't say that you don't do that, but it can have more restrictions on it.
Well, your local's gonna be the area that you're in, and it depends on that,
Right,
how you ground it.
right,
So it'd be Bravo.
problem. Which is a proper grounding method for a tower?
Delta.
I think whoever came up with these gets a cut on ground rods.
Those things are not cheap.
No, it used to be.
Although they're less expensive now than they were 3 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, it's because of the price of
Yeah,
copper.
Well, yeah, the price of copper
Yeah.
went way up after COVID and, yeah, I think it was maybe, well, it was when I was first beginning to plan my shack out, copper ground rod was $54. We put 3/8 inch copper ground rod, $54.
Oh, most of them now are just plated.
They're $20 now.
Yeah, it is copper plated steel.
Yeah.
Which of the following is good practice when installing ground wires on a tower for lightning protection?
Charlie.
Charlie.
Which of the following is true when installing grounding conductors used for lightning protection? Charlie. Try to have them straight as possible and short as possible. No coils or drip loops. What should be done to all external ground rods or earth connections?
Charlie.
Charlie. The whole point is to have that ground system as low of impedance as you can, or resistance. Okay. You have, especially here in this part of the country, I think we're uh, there's a chart showing the lightning strike percentage or something. We're like 80 out of 100 or something. So lightning is an issue around here. Colorado, you may not care too much.
I'll tell you what. We get some pretty good little afternoon storms during summertime.
Oh, Thursday, we had a tremendous amount of lightning around here.
Yeah. I even disconnected my radio. I was using my little handheld.
A lightning strike or actually even a close strike could induce enough current in your antenna to cause a problem. Definitely if it is a direct hit on your antenna. So some of the stuff you can do to try to mitigate it, if you have a direct hit, you're gonna have some issues, but as a minimum, you should have lightning arresters on all of your antenna. If you got more than one coax coming in, should have an antenna or a lightning arrestor at the entrance to your shack. You want to keep the lightning going to ground outside before it gets in. Typically, lightning arresters are a gas discharge tube that will arc over at some particular voltage. One of the things you have to watch out for, especially if you buy off of Amazon or AliExpress and get a lightning arrestor, they may have, if they even say, they may say that the gas discharge tubes are 90 volts. Well, that's not much margin. If you're putting out 100 watts into 50 ohms at 70 volts RMS, you're actually going to, peaks are going to exceed 90 volts. So those cheap lightning arresters really aren't even rated for 100 watts.
Well, so if it arcs and then while you're transmitting,
That's, yeah,
the problem, yeah.
yeah. Your SWR goes funky.
Yeah, and I've seen those too. It's just, all it is just a wire going through there, and then you got a screw that goes in there and it's sort of hollow in there, I think.
Well, it's gas in that little
Yeah.
tube cartridge, and there's usually a screw so you can replace them. It's just a drop-in little cartridge. So in the lightning arresters, especially the better quality ones, the quite more expensive ones, they'll be rated by power and frequency. So that's something you have to watch out for. If you're going to have power amplifier and running a kilowatt or a kilowatt and a half, you know, you need lightning arresters with tubes that are like 600 volts or something like that. But the better ones will have that, and they'll also be different for UHF than HF. There's different frequency ranges. Here's a typical little block diagram. And in a lot of cases, the lightning arrestor has a blocking capacitor in it. So if you get static electric charge due to wind on the antenna, it blocks that because that's a DC charge. And that's the reason for having that there. If you've got those type and you had say a remote antenna tuner, you know, normally those are controlled by a DC voltage on the antenna. Well, you can't do that with that kind of lightning arrestor. So that's why you have to, another thing you have to check, if you need to control something over the antenna remotely, then you need to get one that doesn't have the blocking capacitor. I don't know. I suspect some radios may have a bleed resistor at the input. I don't know that I've noticed a schematic with that. And normally what you may do is put an antenna switch in front of the radio that actually shorts the antenna to ground when that is not selected. So your antenna is grounded, and that takes care of dissipating static charge. And also, if a lightning strike, it's another path to get the lightning back to ground without affecting other things.
Are you gonna hook the ground to your antenna switch?
Yeah.
And then that's gonna go to your
It goes,
ground in
your antenna switch will have 2, 3, 4 inputs. Okay. Because you can have that many antennas. When you have in the off position, all of those inputs on that switch are tied to ground, the center conductor, as well as the shield. And when you select one, then it, you know, basically ungrounds it, connects it to your radio. Of course, you know, talking $100, $150 for a switch. Like I said, it's not a cheap hobby. Where should a lightning arrestor be installed in a coaxial feed line?
Yeah.
Definitely outside the shack. Now, sometimes you'll see them mounted at the base of, say you've got a mast that your antenna's on that's grounded. A lot of times you will see lightning arresters at that point, right at the base of it, tied to or connected to the ground rod, which is probably a much better way to do it than having it up at a windowsill at your house. As long as there's not a great distance between where that mast is and where it enters the house. And you could have a second one. I mean, it can't hurt. Okay, so putting up antennas or towers, the main thing is to watch for electrical power lines. Make sure that you're not going to have it get within 10 feet. Never string an antenna on a power pole, even a long wire type antenna, like an infed or something where it's just copper wire and you put one end of it up there. It's not a good idea. The ends of these antennas, because it's going to be a very high impedance, it's going to have a very high voltage, which can cause severe RF burns. If you're dealing with towers, you want to make sure that you have tower climbing training, that you have a certified harness, that you have a ground observer, and you don't crank up towers, or you haven't ensured that the interlocks are in place. And safety wire on the turnbuckles. Tower should have each leg grounded, all tied together and tied to your shack safety ground. And lightning arresters on a grounded panel where they enter. I actually prefer them, like I said, if it's like a mast and there's a ground rod there at that point, and then maybe one at the shack entrance.
So,
The idea is to get it to ground as quick
right,
as possible.
so I got a 75-foot coax
Okay.
and it comes down and it goes into the eave of my house. There's it's just one line coming in and to the back of the radio. Where would you ground that? Where would you put an arrestor on that?
Well, I would put another piece of coax in there and put an antenna arrestor someplace. Not necessarily run it through the eaves, run it down to the ground and over. You could mount the lightning arrestor on the ground rod.
So you run your coax down to the arrestor, and then
Yeah, but
another coax back up into the.
then I have to come down and
Yeah.
back up to come into the
Well,
house.
it's your
Right.
choice.
Yeah.
You know, you can leave it like you have and let lightning in the house or try to get it to ground.
I'm disconnected when it's like.
Well, that's another option.
That's what I've been doing.
Yeah.
Anytime I see a storm around, it's got lightning, I turn it off and disconnect the antenna.
Yeah.
So,
I used to do that too till I put an antenna switch in, and now it's too hard because I got like 4 coaxes that I have to.
yeah,
I just rely on the ground and the switch and the fact that I got lightning arresters outside.
well, I've only got 2 coaxes coming in and one of them's just a scanner antenna. But it's still,
Antenna's an antenna, doesn't
Yeah.
matter